I planted the covert listening bug on a bitterly cold Thursday evening. It was a tiny, unobtrusive device with a magnetic back, effortlessly tucked behind the heavy cast-iron radiator in my mother-in-law's apartment, sitting there as if it naturally belonged. The entire covert operation took me precisely 40 seconds. Walking back across the frozen grass, I desperately tried to convince myself that I wasn't that kind of man. I wasn't the suspicious, lurking type, nor was I the paranoid husband who spied on his own family. But 3 grueling months of watching my wife silently slip out of our warm bed at the stroke of midnight had steadily morphed me into a stranger I barely recognized in the bathroom mirror. My name is Nolan Vance. I'm 39 years old, working as a commercial construction project manager based out of Columbus, Ohio. Sylvia and I had been married for 8 solid years. Or at least, I had wholeheartedly believed they were solid years. We shared a beautiful house, an overly energetic golden retriever named Buster, and cozy Saturday morning routines that involved brewing terrible coffee but sharing wonderful conversations. It was the exact kind of marriage that looked precisely like what society told you it was supposed to be. Then the night wandering started. It began small and subtle. Sylvia rising quietly around 11:00 p.m., whispering softly that she couldn't sleep and was just going downstairs to read. Except I came down once at midnight for a glass of water, and the house was dead empty. Her car was still parked in the driveway, but her thick winter coat was missing from the brass hook by the door. She eventually slipped back inside at 2:00 a.m., her skin radiating the cold winter air, carrying a faint scent of something metallic and unfamiliar that I couldn't quite name. I asked her about it once, trying to sound as casual as possible. She claimed she'd been sitting out on the front porch, needing some fresh air to clear her head. The porch faces the main street. I had stood silently checking through the upstairs bedroom window for 20 consecutive minutes that exact night. She was never on the porch. Her mother, Beatrice, lived in the cozy, custom-built apartment we had constructed directly next door to our property. We shared a long driveway, with barely 20 footsteps separating our front doors. Sylvia visited her mother daily, which was completely normal. They were incredibly close, but absolutely nobody visits their elderly mother at midnight. Nobody except Sylvia. So I forcefully swallowed my pride, stopped asking pointless questions, and decided to start hunting for the actual answers myself. The first night's audio recording was mostly a bunch of nothing. It captured the mundane sounds of Beatrice shuffling around her kitchen, a late-night television show murmuring softly in the background, and the rhythmic clicking of the radiator heating up. I sat parked in my truck in the driveway at 1:00 a.m., earbuds shoved deep into my ears, listening to my mother-in-law watch infomercials, and I genuinely felt like the most pathetic, insecure man alive. Then Sylvia's voice suddenly pierced through the static. It was crisp, clear, and uncomfortably close, as if she were standing right on top of the hidden device. Nolan doesn't suspect a single thing. My hand tightened around my smartphone so hard my knuckles turned a bruised white. Beatrice's response was much quieter, muffled by distance as she stood further from the microphone. I could only catch broken, anxious fragments. "Can't keep doing this, Sylvia. Way too risky." "Mom, I promise you, it's totally fine." Sylvia's voice remained incredibly steady, void of any guilt. It was the exact same sweet voice that had lovingly whispered good night to me just 40 minutes earlier. Nolan trusts me completely. That's the whole point of this. And then a third voice emerged. Male, low, incredibly deliberate, echoing from somewhere much deeper inside the living room. My stomach dropped violently, plummeting straight through the leather car seat. I quickly rewound the file 3 times, pressing my phone's volume button to its absolute maximum limit. The man was saying something complex that I couldn't fully decipher. Just 2 terrifying words surfaced clearly through the electronic hiss. The account. I sat frozen in that freezing truck until 3:00 a.m., obsessively replaying that specific recording 47 times. I tried desperately to identify the low voice, tried to mentally fill the silent gaps between the fragments, and tried to comprehend what my mother-in-law, a sweet 64-year-old retired middle school teacher who baked famous banana bread and affectionately called me son, was doing harboring a mysterious man in her apartment at midnight. All while my own wife stood calmly in her kitchen declaring, "Nolan trusts me completely." She didn't say he doesn't know about the affair. She didn't say he doesn't know about another man. She said he trusts me completely. Whatever sinister web this was, it was vastly bigger than a simple case of romantic infidelity. Sleep was an absolute impossibility that night. I lay stiffly beside Sylvia in the pitch-black room, acutely listening to her deep, rhythmic breathing. She was steady, incredibly peaceful, and completely unbothered. Meanwhile, my brain frantically raced, trying to painfully recall every single financial conversation we'd shared over the past 12 months. Every joint account, every obscure legal document she'd casually asked me to sign while I was distracted, every single moment I'd blindly handed something over without reading the fine print simply because she was my wife. And that is exactly what blind trust looks like from the inside. In hindsight, it looks exactly like catastrophic stupidity. I dialed my older brother Kyle at 6:00 a.m. sharp. He answered on the very first ring because Kyle has always been that kind of rock, 20 years of early morning calls, and he had never failed me once. I kept my voice down to a harsh whisper, stepped outside onto the freezing front porch Sylvia had supposedly been sitting on, and spilled everything to him. He was dead quiet for a long, agonizing moment. "Nolan, what exactly is in your name? Jointly with Sylvia, I mean." I ran through the terrifying inventory mentally. The house, our primary joint checking account, my heavy machinery business insurance policy. I actually added her as the primary beneficiary 4 years ago without a second thought. I paused, my throat suddenly going dry. "And then, the Hudson contract," I said slowly, the realization hitting me like a freight train. Kyle exhaled a sharp, worried breath over the line. The Hudson contract was the absolute crown jewel of my entire career. It was a massive $2.3 million commercial development deal I had been tirelessly building toward for 3 grueling years. The paperwork was signed, sealed, and finalized just 6 weeks ago. The massive project capital was securely sitting in a joint business account that Sylvia had graciously helped me set up. Her suggestion had seemed completely practical at the time. She argued it would be far easier for managing our shared corporate expenses. Her name was legally tethered to it. $2.3 million sitting vulnerable in an account with my deceitful wife's name attached. And somewhere inside Beatrice's apartment last night, an unknown man was plotting about the account at 1 in the morning. My blood turned to absolute ice. I called my primary bank at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I sat parked in my truck at a desolate gas station 3 blocks away from our home. The heavy engine was rumbling, the heater was blasting on high, yet my hands were completely steady. It was that terrifying kind of steadiness that only happens when your brain completely shuts off human emotion and shifts entirely into primitive survival mode. The senior account manager's name was Greg. I had dealt with him a few times before. He was a pleasant, highly thorough professional. "Mr. Vance, I'm actually very glad you called." There was a heavy pause on the line that lasted 1 second too long. "There was a highly unusual activity flag triggered on your Hudson Project account late yesterday afternoon. A third-party authorization request was digitally submitted." "What specific kind of authorization request, Greg?" "Someone forcefully attempted to add a secondary signatory to the master account. If it had been approved, it would have immediately granted full, unrestricted withdrawal access to the funds." Another tense pause. The request was automatically flagged by our fraud department because the submission originated from an IP address located in Nevada. Do you have any current business connections to Nevada, Mr. Vance? I had never stepped foot in Nevada in my entire life. Who exactly submitted the request? I demanded, my voice eerily calm. It was submitted directly under your wife's verified credentials, Greg said carefully, clearly sensing the tension. But Mr. Vance, the smart device used has never been associated with any of her previous banking history. It was a completely different geographic location, an untraceable browser, a different everything. He nervously cleared his throat. We temporarily flagged it rather than processing it, but I would strongly recommend. Freeze the entire account, I commanded instantly. Right now, a total indefinite freeze. Already taken care of as of this morning, sir. I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring blankly at the gas pumps. Someone hiding behind a proxy in Nevada had tried to seamlessly crack open a $2.3 million project account using Sylvia's personal credentials. Someone who intimately knew her banking details, her secure login, and her private security answers. Someone she had voluntarily handed the keys to my kingdom to. I eventually drove back home. Sylvia was standing in the sunlit kitchen cooking scrambled eggs, humming a cheerful pop song softly to herself. She turned around and flashed a brilliant, loving smile when I walked through the door. "Morning, handsome. Are you hungry?" I forced a flawless smile right back. "Starving," I lied. That evening, Sylvia slipped out of the house at 11:47 p.m. I stared blankly at the bedroom ceiling for exactly 90 seconds after she gently pulled the front door shut. Then I was instantly up, fully dressed, earbuds jammed in, with the live audio recording already streaming to my phone. I sat silently at the top of our pitch-dark staircase like a condemned man, waiting for a guilty verdict he already knew was inevitable. Her voice crackled through within minutes. It was much clearer tonight. She was sitting much closer to the radiator. "He froze the account. Mom, he froze it." Absolute silence on the other end. "I don't know how. Maybe the bank's security system flagged the IP. Maybe." A terrified pause. No, Nolan isn't smart enough to figure it out." Her voice dropped to a sinister whisper. "He can't possibly know. He was completely normal this morning. He made the coffee. He kissed me goodbye. He doesn't know a thing." Then the man's deep voice echoed again. He was much closer to the mic this time. Much, much closer. And this time I heard his words with crystal clarity. "Then we pivot. We move straight to the backup plan, the life insurance policy. My heavy machinery business insurance policy. A staggering $1.8 million payout. Sylvia was legally listed as the sole beneficiary, a massive financial safety net I had signed off on without a moment's hesitation 4 years ago. Because that is exactly what married people do. They protect one another. They sign papers. They trust. But the policy only pays out on." Beatrice's voice trembled, dripping with nervous dread. "I know exactly what it pays out on, Beatrice," the man stated coldly. The living room went completely, horrifyingly silent on the recording. And in the depths of that heavy silence, I finally understood the terrifying architecture of the invisible prison being built around me. They had been working quietly, patiently, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The stolen bank account was merely option 1. The massive life insurance payout was option 2. And option 2 only legally activated under one very specific, fatal condition that no man ever wants to think about regarding his own wife. I wasn't just being financially robbed. I was actively being marked for erasure. I sat alone on that dark, cold staircase and made a firm resolution right then and there. No lawyers first, no bank meetings, no calling my brother. I desperately needed to know the face of the man who was plotting my demise. Tonight, I moved stealthily through our shared backyard in complete, utter darkness. No phone flashlight, no heavy breathing, just the biting cold November wind, and 14 years of knowing exactly which wooden floorboard on Beatrice's back porch creaked loudly and which ones were silent. I knew this because I had painstakingly built that beautiful porch myself, with my own bare hands, just 3 summers ago. I carefully avoided the third wooden board from the left. Beatrice's kitchen light was glowing warmly. The floral curtains were drawn tight, but they were incredibly thin, the cheap kind of fabric that diffuses light but completely fails to block out human silhouettes. I pressed my back tightly against the freezing exterior vinyl siding beside the window and just listened first. 3 distinct voices, very close. I pulled out my phone in the dark and hit the record button. Then I slowly shifted 2 inches to the right and peered intensely through a tiny, half-inch gap where the cheap curtain didn't quite reach the window frame. Beatrice sat nervously at her rustic wooden kitchen table, her frail hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic coffee mug, her shoulders hunched defensively. She looked exactly like a guilty woman who had reluctantly agreed to a demonic pact she couldn't figure out how to escape. Sylvia stood arrogantly near the marble counter, impeccably composed, looking almost businesslike, and the mysterious man sat with his broad back to the window. He had wide, imposing shoulders, a dark leather jacket, and thick silver hair trimmed meticulously close at the neck. I couldn't see his face yet. Sylvia was laying out the timeline. 2 more weeks, maximum. Nolan's current work schedule has him fully on site in Dayton from the 14th straight through the 21st. That is our perfect window. Our window for what? I already knew the sickening answer. The policy documentation is totally clean, the silver-haired man asked. Completely airtight, Sylvia replied with a proud smirk. I handled the paperwork personally. The man nodded slowly in approval. Then, he gently reached across the wooden table and placed his large, weathered hand affectionately over Beatrice's trembling. It was a subtle gesture, so deeply familiar, so practiced, so incredibly intimate. Beatrice looked up at him with a complex emotional expression I recognized instantly, but my brain absolutely refused to process it. It was the deeply devoted way a woman looks at a man she has passionately loved for decades. The man slowly turned his head, and I finally saw his face in perfect profile. In that fleeting second, the entire earth disappeared completely beneath my boots. It was my own father, Richard Vance, 67 years old, a retired master electrician from Columbus. The very man who had patiently taught me how to throw a baseball in the park, the man who proudly co-signed my very first business loan, the man who sat beaming in the front row at my wedding with joyful tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. My own father was sitting in my deceitful mother-in-law's kitchen at midnight, holding her hand, looking at her with the deep affection of a man who had loved her privately, in the shadows, for an incredibly long time. I honestly have zero memory of walking back across the freezing yard. I don't remember blindly climbing my own porch steps, or crossing the tiled kitchen, or eventually collapsing onto the bottom stair inside my dark house. I just distinctly remember suddenly being there, shivering violently in the pitch black, my phone still actively recording in my trembling grip. The ambient sounds of the sleeping neighborhood felt completely muffled, as if someone had wrapped my entire existence in thick cotton. My own father and Beatrice. I numbly pulled up the initial recording from night 1 and listened to it again with a completely shattered perspective. The third voice that I hadn't quite recognized, slightly distorted by the cheap microphone, wholly unfamiliar because the context was so impossibly alien to my reality. It was my own father's deep, gravelly voice. How long? That was the absolute only coherent thought my fractured brain could form. Everything else, the frozen millions, the lethal insurance policy, the upcoming assassination window in Dayton, all of it was temporarily drowned out beneath one single, catastrophic question. How long had this massive lie been happening? I called my brother Kyle again at 1:00 a.m. I didn't even bother saying hello. I just silently held the phone up and played him 30 agonizing seconds of the live kitchen recording. His resulting silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. "Nolan," Kyle finally choked out, How long did you know? Another heavy silence fell between us. This one was shorter, but it was more than enough to confirm my worst fears. Kyle, my voice scraped out of my throat like crushed gravel. How long did you know about Dad and Beatrice? He exhaled a long, shuddering breath. 7 years, he whispered, his voice cracking with immense guilt. I accidentally found out 7 years ago. I thought it had ended, Nolan. I swear to God, I thought the affair was over. 7 long years. My own flesh and blood had carried that toxic secret for 7 years. My father had been sneaking into that adjacent apartment for God only knows how long. And Sylvia, the beautiful woman I had deeply loved, the woman who had stood across from me at the altar and made sacred promises in front of everyone I cherished, had known exactly who her mother was secretly sleeping with when she agreed to marry me. She hadn't married a loving husband. She had married a convenient financial bridge. I walked straight into Detective Marcus Pierce's office the very next morning. He was a seasoned 12-year veteran of the Financial and Major Crimes Division. I walked in carrying 3 damning nights of crystal-clear audio recordings, a mountain of forged bank documentation, the Nevada IP fraud flag provided by Greg, and a $1.8 million life insurance policy bearing my name on one end and my potential murderers on the other. Detective Pierce listened to the entire horrifying saga without moving a single muscle. When it was over, he finally leaned back in his creaky chair. This is a textbook attempted conspiracy to commit massive wire fraud, and potentially much, much worse, depending on how far we can prove the insurance murder angle developed. He leaned forward, looking me dead in the eye. Mr. Vance, you did absolutely everything right. 99% of people confront their spouses immediately out of sheer anger, and they end up completely destroying their own legal case. Or worse, they end up dead. The police heavily raided the house and arrested Sylvia on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. My father, Richard, came down to the police station voluntarily to surrender. He fully cooperated with the detectives. He eventually sat across from me in a stark, freezing interrogation room with a metal table between us that felt like it stretched for 1,000 miles. He couldn't even look me in the eyes for more than 2 pathetic seconds at a time. He cried and told me he was deeply sorry. I actually believed him. But it didn't change a single damn thing. Beatrice quickly pled guilty to multiple conspiracy and fraud charges to avoid a lengthy trial. Sylvia formally received a harsh 4-year sentence in a state penitentiary. My father, whose provable involvement technically stopped just short of executing the financial fraud itself, received a heavy probation sentence. But he ultimately lost something that no legal court could ever formally sentence a man to lose. He entirely lost his son. I spent the next year ruthlessly rebuilding my life. I secured the Hudson Project account, successfully finished the massive contract ahead of schedule, and aggressively legally removed every single name except my own from absolutely everything I had ever worked for. Some quiet nights, I still sit out on that wooden front porch, the exact one Sylvia supposedly used to get her fresh air, the same one I had frantically watched from the upstairs bedroom window, wondering exactly what kind of blind, naive fool couldn't see the massive betrayal happening right in front of his face. As it turns out, the trusting kind of fool. But I don't ever consider my ability to trust a personal flaw anymore. I fiercely consider it undeniable evidence that, unlike them, I was actually capable of loving completely.